The studio lights were still warming up when Sandra entered the set that morning. She had been early again, as always. The place smelled of coffee and old wood, and quiet chatter echoed from a distance. It was the kind of silence that felt too heavy, the kind that made every footstep sound louder than it should. Today was important. The scene they were about to film was one of the hardest of her career. She had practiced for nights, but something inside her felt off. Keanu was already there, standing near the camera crew, dressed simply, calm as always. He greeted her with a gentle nod, not with words. His calmness used to make her feel steady, but today it made her uneasy. She smiled back and tried to hide the tremor in her hands. The director walked over, script in hand, talking fast, explaining the emotional weight of the scene. Sandra nodded as if she understood, but her thoughts were far away. She was tired. Too tired to admit it. As the camera rolled for the first take, Sandra felt her voice slip. The emotion that usually flowed so easily now sounded forced. She forgot a line halfway through, and her silence filled the room. The director called cut softly. Someone adjusted the light. No one said anything cruel, but silence can sometimes hurt more than words. She could feel the quiet judgment, the unspoken disappointment. She looked down, pretending to fix her costume, her eyes wet but refusing to fall apart. Keanu walked past her gently, picking up his cup of tea. His expression didn't change. Calm, still, distant. But his eyes had something else in them, something that noticed more than he let on. When the break was called, Sandra stepped outside the set. The air was cold. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The city noise outside the studio sounded almost comforting. She leaned against a wall and closed her eyes. She thought of how it used to be. The laughter between takes, the comfort of knowing she was giving her best. But lately every scene felt like a test. She didn't know why the pressure had become so heavy. Maybe it was her own fear. Maybe it was the whispers around her, or maybe it was because everyone expected perfection from her, all the time. As she stood there, Keanu's shadow stretched across the pavement. He didn't say her name, didn't ask if she was okay. Instead, he handed her a small folded napkin from the studio cafe. Written on it in neat handwriting were the words, "Breathe between the lines." She looked up, puzzled. Keanu gave a small smile and walked back inside. The words stayed with her. Breathe between the lines. It was such a strange sentence, but something about it made her stop thinking and just breathe. For the first time in days, her shoulders loosened. Maybe he knew that she didn't need advice or sympathy. Maybe he knew that silence could heal too. The next scene was supposed to start soon. The crew began preparing again. Sandra fixed her hair and walked back in. She tried to shake off the earlier mistake, but the pressure was still there, clinging to her mind. She looked around at every crew member moving quickly, every light being tested again. She felt small in that moment. Then, the assistant director rushed in and whispered something to the team. Suddenly, the main director called for a full stop. "Technical adjustment," he said, waving his hand. Sandra blinked. A delay? Right before her big scene? It made no sense. Everyone seemed confused. But Keanu simply nodded and moved toward the back of the set, quietly talking to the director. Sandra couldn't hear the conversation, but the tone was calm, serious, deliberate. The shooting for the day was postponed. The crew started packing up. Sandra felt guilt crawl up her throat. She thought maybe she was the reason. Maybe her mistake had caused this pause. She wanted to ask, but something held her back. She watched Keanu from a distance, wondering what he had said, why he seemed so composed while she was falling apart inside. That night, she sat in her hotel room staring at her script. Her hands were trembling slightly. Every page reminded her of the pressure she carried. She read the dialogue again and again until one of the pages slipped out and fell to the floor. She bent down to pick it up and froze. It was a page she hadn't seen before. The paper looked newer, printed differently. It had a scene written in her character's voice, but it wasn't part of the current script. At the bottom of the page, in small handwriting, were the words, "You once said this mattered to you." Her heart skipped. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Keanu's. She sat there for a long time, staring at that page. The scene was emotional, raw, honest, something she had suggested long ago but was told it didn't fit. And yet, here it was, rewritten and placed quietly among her lines. She felt a strange warmth spread through her chest mixed with confusion. Why would he bring this back? How did he even remember it? Outside, the city lights flickered against her window. She thought about Keanu's words earlier. Breathe between the lines. Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe he saw what she couldn't see in herself anymore. As she lay down to rest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening behind her back. Something kind. Something that didn't ask for attention. She just didn't know what it was yet. The next morning began quietly. Soft sunlight touched the floor of the studio as Sandra entered with her script pressed tightly in her hand. Her eyes were heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from the thoughts that refused to rest. She kept thinking about that mysterious script page. It still didn't make sense. How could Keanu have remembered something she said years ago during early rehearsals? And why would he secretly bring it back now? The crew was already busy when she arrived. Someone was testing the sound levels, another adjusting the lighting. The atmosphere felt lighter today, though Sandra couldn't tell why. The director looked more relaxed, and there was quiet excitement around, as if something special was about to happen. Keanu was there too, sitting on a wooden stool, flipping through his own copy of the script. He looked calm as always. His stillness had its own presence. It filled the room without needing words. Sandra tried to act normal. She walked over, nodded politely, and asked the assistant when they would continue the scene they left unfinished. But the assistant only smiled and said softly, "Today's plan has changed." "Changed how?" she asked, her heart starting to beat faster. The assistant glanced at Keanu for a moment, then back at her. "We're shooting a new version of that moment." The director said it was Keanu's suggestion, something more personal, more emotional. Sandra froze. Her eyes went to Keanu, who was now pretending to focus on his script, but clearly heard everything. He met her eyes just briefly. No smile, no explanation, only calm understanding. It was as if he was saying, "Trust me," without saying a word. The team began rearranging the set. The lights shifted to a softer tone. The background was changed. The makeup artist approached Sandra and said, "This one will be close-up heavy. They want to capture every small emotion." Sandra nodded, but her mind raced. A new version? A personal one? She wanted to ask the director what exactly they were doing, but deep inside, something told her to wait. The director called her over and handed her the script pages. As she flipped through, her heart skipped again. It was the same page she found last night, the very same emotional speech she once wrote and lost. Her throat tightened. This was real. This was happening. Keanu stood beside her as they prepared. He leaned slightly closer and whispered, "Remember, just speak like you once did when you believed in this." His tone was low, steady, almost like a heartbeat. The cameras rolled. Sandra began to speak the first lines. Her voice trembled slightly, but as she continued, something shifted inside her. The words felt familiar, honest, alive. Every sentence came from her heart, not from the paper. She could feel the emotions she had buried for months return like waves. She spoke of fear, of losing control, of forgetting why she loved what she did. And as she spoke, she looked into Keanu's eyes. He wasn't acting. He was listening. Deeply. Respectfully. The entire set was silent. The crew stopped moving. The sound of her voice was the only thing that existed in that moment. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not from sadness. They were from relief. It was like releasing something she had held for too long. When she finished, there was no immediate applause, just quiet breathing. Then, the director lowered his hands and said softly, "That's the one." A slow wave of applause filled the set. Soft at first, then stronger. Everyone was moved. Even the sound engineer, who rarely showed emotion, wiped his eyes. Sandra looked down, unable to believe what had just happened. She felt free for the first time in months. After the scene ended, she looked for Keanu. He wasn't near the camera anymore. She found him standing quietly near the lighting rig, sipping his tea again, as if nothing special had happened. She walked toward him, still emotional, her voice soft. "Why did you do this?" He shrugged slightly, eyes calm. "It just felt right," he said. "You wrote those words once because they meant something to you. I thought maybe they still did." She wanted to say thank you, but the words didn't come. Her chest was too full. Instead, she just smiled, a quiet, trembling smile that said more than words ever could. The rest of the day passed in a blur. People kept telling her how powerful her performance was, how it felt real, raw, unforgettable. But she didn't feel pride. She felt peace, like something inside her had healed. Late that evening, she sat alone in her trailer. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. It only said, "You see now why breathing between the lines matters." She didn't need to ask who sent it. She smiled and whispered softly, "Yes." But what Sandra didn't know yet was that Keanu's act of kindness went far deeper than just bringing back one old scene. He had quietly changed the direction of the entire schedule. And the reason for it, the real reason, was something that would soon leave her speechless. The morning after that powerful scene felt strangely calm. The studio air carried a softness, as if something invisible had lifted. People greeted Sandra with new warmth. The same crew who once whispered about her mistakes now smiled genuinely. Every camera operator, every assistant, every extra seemed to feel her transformation. But inside her heart, questions still echoed. Who else knew what Keanu had done? And why had he done it so quietly? Without credit, without a single word of attention. She arrived early again, though this time not out of fear. She wanted to feel that space where everything had changed. The empty set still held traces of her emotion from yesterday. The camera lights were off, but their reflection lingered faintly on the metal rails, like memories refusing to fade. Keanu entered a few minutes later. He carried a small notebook and a cup of black tea. He always drank the same kind. No sugar, no milk, just strong and bitter. Sandra watched him for a moment, wondering what kind of mind could stay so calm, so centered, while the world around him shifted endlessly. When he noticed her gaze, he smiled politely. "You were brilliant yesterday," he said simply. "You set me up for it," she replied. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You just needed a mirror that reminded you who you were." She didn't know how to respond. His words always felt like riddles, gentle, simple, but carrying something deeper beneath the surface. Before she could ask more, the director called them for a short meeting. The next few days of filming were being rearranged again. Sandra noticed something strange. Many scenes involving her were being restructured, some rewritten entirely. And every time the director spoke about the new flow, he mentioned Keanu's name. Keanu thought this sequence would bring more emotion. Keanu suggested we adjust the lighting for this part. Keanu felt that Sandra's character deserves more. Silence in this scene. By the third time, Sandra started to understand what was happening. He wasn't just helping her. He was rebuilding the film from within, piece by piece, without taking a single bit of credit. Later, during lunch break, she found him alone by the back door of the studio, sketching something in his notebook. It wasn't words. It was a series of lines and shapes, like rough storyboards. "You're directing me without saying it," she said, half smiling. He looked up calmly. "I'm just helping the story find its truth." "But why?" she asked softly. "You already carry the film. Everyone knows your part is the anchor. You don't need to do this for me." He paused, thinking. "Because respect isn't shown when someone is strong," he said. "It's shown when they're uncertain and you still stand beside them." Those words struck deep. She didn't say anything for a while. A small wind passed through the door, moving a few sheets of paper across the floor. Sandra watched them fall near her feet, one page landing face up. It was another old scene she had once written long ago during early workshops. A quiet, emotional moment between two characters by a train window. She bent down to pick it up. Handwritten notes in the margin read, "Revise lighting, keep raw tone." "Kay," she looked at Keanu. "You've been keeping these?" He gave a faint nod. "Some stories deserve a second chance. Sometimes people do too." His words stayed in her chest long after. That afternoon, they began filming again. The new version of the train window scene was different. Slower, deeper, more real. Keanu didn't perform his lines as if he was acting. He listened, allowing Sandra to lead. It was like dancing without music, trusting only the rhythm of each other's breath. The camera captured something invisible, respect so genuine it could be felt even in silence. When the take ended, the director looked emotional. "That's it," he said. "That's the feeling we were missing." The crew clapped quietly. Not the loud kind of applause, but the kind that carries meaning. Sandra turned to Keanu again, searching his face. But as always, he looked as calm as before, as if he had done nothing special at all. As the day ended, Sandra found herself sitting alone on the set bench. She replayed everything, the mysterious rewritten pages, the emotional new scenes, the way Keanu kept turning her forgotten ideas into reality. There was kindness in his silence, but also something hidden. It wasn't just generosity, it was purpose. That night, she finally asked the director about it. "Did Keanu talk to you about changing the schedule?" The director hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, he did. He said we were losing something that made the story human. He told me to trust your instinct. Said you'd find it again once you stopped trying to prove anything." Sandra stared at him, speechless. "He said that?" "Word for word," the director replied. "He even delayed one of his own scenes to make space for you to breathe between yours." She left the office quietly. Outside, the studio was empty except for the soft glow of one distant light. She stood there for a while, looking at the stars barely visible beyond the city haze. And for the first time, she realized the truth. Keanu hadn't just saved a scene. He had saved her spirit. But the real reason behind his quiet actions, the one that would reveal everything, was still hidden. And it was something she could never have imagined. The next few days moved like a dream. Every scene they filmed carried new energy, calm but powerful. Sandra felt alive again. Every time she looked into the camera, she saw not just her character, but the person she was becoming. Stronger, clearer, more honest. The whispers of doubt had stopped. People talked about her comeback, about how she had found her spark again. But no one knew the real reason behind it. Only one man did. Keanu kept his usual distance. He arrived quietly, greeted everyone, and stayed focused. He never once mentioned the changes he had made for her. He acted as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he hadn't been the reason she rediscovered herself. His humility was almost confusing. There was no pride in him, only quiet purpose. One afternoon, while they were preparing for a complex emotional sequence, Sandra noticed something strange. Keanu wasn't on set. His chair was empty. His teacup sat untouched. She asked an assistant where he was, and the answer caught her off guard. "He's in the editing room," the assistant said. "He's been there all morning." "Editing room?" She repeated, confused. "But that's not his job." The assistant smiled softly. "I think he's helping the editor with something for you." Her heart skipped. She put down her script and walked quietly down the hall toward the editing suite. The door was slightly open, and through the small gap, she saw Keanu sitting beside the film editor, watching the monitors closely. Clips from her emotional scenes played on the screen, raw, unfinished, unpolished. He was carefully adjusting timing, removing background noise, slowing down certain frames. His voice was calm as he said, "Don't overcut her pauses. Let the silence speak. It's more real that way." Sandra stood still in the doorway, unseen. He wasn't doing it for recognition. He wasn't doing it for show. He was protecting the authenticity of her performance, making sure her emotion stayed untouched. It was like watching someone guard a flame from the wind. She stepped back quietly and returned to the set before he noticed her. Her chest felt tight, not from sadness, but from the weight of gratitude she couldn't yet express. That evening, after shooting wrapped, she found him sitting alone near the back of the lot, reading a small notebook again. The orange glow of the setting sun painted everything golden. She walked up slowly. "I saw you in the editing room," she said softly. He looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled faintly. "You weren't supposed to see that." "You've been helping shape my scenes," she continued. "You even delayed your own schedule." "Why, Keanu? You didn't have to." He closed the notebook and leaned back, his gaze calm but distant. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Someone I once worked with years ago. She was talented, kind, and full of energy, but she lost faith in herself because the world stopped believing in her. She left acting not because she failed, but because no one stood beside her when she needed someone to believe again." Sandra listened in silence. "I promised myself," he continued, "that if I ever saw someone standing at that same edge, I'd do something before they fell." His words hit her like a wave. It wasn't just about her performance. It was something deeper, a promise born from pain. "So all this," she whispered, "was because you didn't want history to repeat itself?" He nodded slightly. "Kindness isn't loud, Sandra. It's quiet work. It doesn't need to be seen to be real." She looked at him for a long moment. He wasn't just a co-star anymore. He was something else entirely, a reminder that compassion could exist even in the harshest corners of fame. Before she left, she asked one more question. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He smiled softly. "Because you wouldn't have believed it. Sometimes people have to feel their strength, not be told about it." That night, she couldn't sleep. Every word he said played in her mind. She thought about that forgotten actress he mentioned, the one who gave up when no one stood beside her. Maybe that loss had shaped the kindness he now carried. Maybe that was why he never looked for credit, why his eyes held both wisdom and sadness. The next day, when she arrived on set, she decided something quietly in her heart. If he had spent all this time helping her rise again, she would make sure his silence was finally seen for what it truly was. What she didn't know yet was that her chance to return that kindness was coming sooner than she thought, and in a way neither of them expected. The next morning began like any other, yet something felt different. The air on set carried a quiet tension, as if everyone sensed a storm approaching. The final sequence of the film was about to be shot, the most emotional, most demanding scene of all. It was the one that would decide how audiences remembered the story. For Sandra, it was the moment she had been building toward. For Keanu, it was the moment he had been preparing her for. As Sandra entered, she noticed Keanu sitting in a chair near the corner, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He looked calm, but there was a trace of weariness in his face she hadn't seen before. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his cup of tea. She wanted to ask if he was all right, but he opened his eyes before she could speak and smiled softly, as if reading her thoughts. "You ready?" he asked gently. She nodded. "More than ever." The director gathered the cast and crew. He explained that this scene would be filmed in one continuous take. No cuts, no retakes. Everything had to come from the heart. Sandra's pulse quickened. She looked at Keanu, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Trust yourself," he said. "And whatever happens, keep going." The cameras rolled. Sandra began her dialogue. Her voice was steady, filled with emotion. Keanu responded with quiet strength, his eyes full of understanding. The scene moved like water, natural and powerful. Then, halfway through, something unexpected happened. One of the background lights flickered and went out, casting half the room in shadow. The director didn't call cut. The cameras kept rolling. For a split second, Sandra froze. The sudden darkness threw her off, but then she saw Keanu's expression. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent signal to continue. She trusted him. She kept speaking, and instead of breaking the emotion, the half-light made the scene even more powerful. Her trembling voice under the dim glow looked heartbreakingly real. When it ended, the room was silent. The director finally whispered, "Cut!" And then everyone broke into applause. People were clapping, cheering, even tearing up. The camera crew stood still, speechless. The assistant director turned away, wiping his eyes. But Keanu didn't celebrate. He smiled faintly, bowed to the director, and walked off set. Sandra followed him outside, where the evening sky was painted orange and pink. "You didn't wait to hear the praise," she said softly. "It's not my moment," he replied. "It's yours." She stepped closer. "You keep saying that, but it's not true. None of this would have happened without you. The scene, the comeback, the strength. You gave it back to me." He looked at her quietly, his eyes thoughtful. "No, Sandra," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you of what was already inside you." She shook her head. "You did more than remind me. You changed everything. And you never once asked for anything in return." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed gently against their coats. The world felt still, as if time had stopped between two souls who understood something too deep for words. Then Keanu said something that made her heart twist. "This was my last film for a while." She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I've been thinking of taking a long break, he said. I need time away, time to reflect, to do something different. I didn't want to say anything before the shoot was done. I didn't want it to affect you. Her chest tightened. So all of this was my way of leaving something good behind, he finished gently. People forget most of what we say or do on set, but they remember how you made them feel. I wanted you to walk away from this stronger, not lost. His words hit her harder than she expected. For a second, she didn't know whether to thank him or ask him to stay. Before she could speak, the director called them back for final close-up shots. Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch light but grounding. Go make it yours, he said softly. And she did. The final take was perfect. Pure, raw, unbroken. When it ended, the crew cheered so loud it echoed across the lot. Sandra turned to find Keanu, but he wasn't there anymore. His chair was empty, his teacup gone. He had left quietly, the same way he had arrived, without attention, without farewell, leaving only peace behind. As the night grew darker, she sat on the empty set, the applause still ringing in her ears. And for the first time, she truly understood what he had done, not just for her career, but for her spirit. He had shown her what humility looked like, what quiet respect could do, what true kindness really meant. She whispered to the empty air. You'll never know how much this meant. But somewhere beyond the silence, she felt he already did. What she didn't know was that his departure carried one more hidden gesture, a final act of kindness she hadn't yet discovered. It was waiting for her, quietly, just like him. The morning after the final scene wrapped, the studio felt emptier than ever. The cameras were covered, the lights dimmed, and the once busy corridors now echoed with quiet footsteps. Sandra walked slowly through the hall, still half lost in thought. The applause from last night still rang faintly in her memory, but Keanu's absence left a silence she couldn't shake. He hadn't said goodbye. No note, no message, no call. He had simply vanished like a calm breeze after a storm. She stood, for a long time on the empty set, staring at the chair he used to sit in. A few small things remained on the table beside it. A half-finished cup of tea, a folded napkin, and a small notebook. Her heart skipped. She knew that notebook. He carried it everywhere. It was where he wrote down quiet thoughts, notes about scenes, sketches of light angles, fragments of ideas. She hesitated before touching it, then finally opened the cover. Inside the first page was a short line written in his neat handwriting. For the moments that made you forget who you were, and the ones that helped you remember. Her eyes softened. She turned the next page. What she saw made her breath catch. It wasn't just random notes or drawings. It was a full collection of detailed scene outlines, moments that she thought were spontaneous, but which Keanu had quietly planned to bring her confidence back. There were short entries like, move camera 2 feet closer to capture her real eyes, not the performance. Reintroduce her deleted speech scene. It's the key to her strength. Give her silence before emotional scenes. She works better when she breathes. Remind her to speak her truth, not the script's words. As she flipped through, her tears began to fall silently. Every page was proof of how deeply he had cared, not as a co-star, not as a mentor, but as a human being who saw her pain and decided to heal it through kindness. He had built the path for her comeback one small act at a time, without ever stepping into the spotlight. Tucked near the end of the notebook was a small folded envelope with her name written in faint pencil. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Sandra, if you're reading this, it means we've finished something beautiful. I didn't want to say goodbye on set because goodbyes feel too final, and this isn't one. This is a thank you for reminding me why we do what we do. You reminded me that stories are not just about fame or success. They are about connection, honesty, and heart. When I saw you struggling, I didn't see weakness. I saw someone trying too hard to meet the world's expectations while forgetting her own. So I did what any friend should do. I made space for you to find yourself again. That's all. No secret plan, no big gesture, just quiet respect. You once told me that acting is about trust. You said you trusted me on screen. I just wanted you to trust yourself the same way. If this film becomes something special, it's because you found your truth again, and everyone felt it. Keep breathing between the lines. It's where the real story lives. Keanu, her hands shook slightly as she finished reading. She pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closed, and breathed deeply. His words were gentle, but they carried the kind of strength that only comes from someone who has lived through quiet pain and chosen compassion anyway. The next few weeks passed quickly. The film entered post-production, and word began spreading that it was one of the most emotionally powerful performances of Sandra's career. When the trailer released, the internet flooded with comments praising the rawness, the honesty, the connection between her and Keanu. People said it felt different, real, like the camera had captured something deeper than acting. At the film premiere, the atmosphere was electric. The theater filled with industry figures, journalists, and fans. Sandra walked the red carpet gracefully, though her mind was somewhere else. She looked around once, hoping maybe Keanu would appear. But he didn't. Still, a part of her felt he was near, watching quietly, smiling somewhere in the crowd she couldn't see. As the movie played, the audience fell silent. There were no whispers, no distractions, just deep emotion filling the room. When the final scene came, the one they shot in half-light, Sandra felt her throat tighten. She could almost hear his voice again, "Trust yourself, and whatever happens, keep going." When the lights came back on, the audience rose to their feet in applause. People were crying. The director hugged her tightly and whispered, "You made history tonight." But Sandra only smiled faintly and looked at the empty seat beside her, the one reserved for Keanu. She whispered under her breath, "We made it." After the screening, as she stepped outside into the soft night air, a familiar scent of tea drifted by from the small cafe across the street. She turned her head, half expecting to see him there, calm, quiet, with that same gentle smile. But there was no one, only a folded napkin sitting on the table near the door. She walked closer, heart pounding. On the napkin, written in his familiar handwriting, were 4 simple words. "Told you. You could." A small laugh escaped her lips, mixed with tears. She sat for a while, holding the napkin, letting the truth sink in. All along, Keanu hadn't just guided her as a friend. He had taught her something about life itself. That true kindness never announces itself. It doesn't need attention. It works in silence, changing lives without asking for thanks. From that day forward, every time she entered a new set, Sandra carried that notebook with her. Not to remember him as a star, but as a reminder of what real strength looks like: quiet, humble, and rooted in respect. Whenever she met a younger actor struggling with self-doubt, she would hand them a small note saying, "Breathe between the lines." And though she never saw Keanu again for a long time, stories about him quietly helping others began to reach her. A young stuntman who said Keanu replaced his broken shoes without a word. A lighting technician who said Keanu worked overtime to help him fix a scene. A driver who received a handwritten thank you note after a long night shift. All these stories carried the same tone: silent generosity. Years later, when she received a Lifetime Achievement Award, she stood on stage smiling through the bright lights. She paused before speaking, her eyes glistening. "There's one person I wish was here tonight," she said softly. "He reminded me that sometimes the most powerful things we do are the ones no one sees. He taught me that kindness isn't about being noticed, it's about noticing." The audience fell silent. She smiled gently, looking up as if toward the stars. "This one's for you, Keanu. I'll remember it forever." And somewhere far away, Sitting quietly in a small cafe, Keanu smiled at the television screen. He sipped his tea, folded his napkin, and whispered under his breath, "She did." The night outside was calm. Rain began to fall softly, and the streetlights reflected golden circles on the wet pavement. Somewhere in that quiet glow, two souls remained connected, not by fame, not by glory, but by a timeless act of respect and kindness that would live forever in their hearts and in the story they created together.